Hey, it's the Monkees! For a very brief period back in the late 1960s, wild pop rockers like the Monkees ruled pop culture. Despite being made for TV to start out, the Monkees eventually developed into a respected and quite popular band. Here's the untold truth of the Monkees. Some bands start in a garage. The Monkees started at Raybert Productions. Run by TV producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, the company had a deal with Screen Gems to develop a sitcom about a rock band, inspired by the madcap Beatles movies A Hard Day's Night and Help. That idea became The Monkees, a show about a group of funny guys who also played music. NBC was interested, and so Rafelson and Schneider hired Cold Gems Records executive Don Kirshner to oversee the musical aspects of the show. To find the actual Monkees, Rafelson and Schneider placed an ad in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. It read, "Madness, auditions, folk and roll musicians, singers for acting roles in new TV series. Running parts for 4 insane boys aged 17 to 21. Want spirited Ben Franks types. Have courage to work. Must come down for interview." Ben Franks was a hip hangout on Hollywood's Sunset Strip, and it set the tone for exactly the sort of show the producers wanted. They were channeling the spirit of not just the Beatles, but of massive 60s juggernauts like the Lovin' Spoonful, who, incidentally, Rafelson and Schneider had approached about doing the TV show. They said no, recruiting ads were published, and the Monkees were hired. The producers eventually auditioned 437 Los Angeles area actors and musicians, and finally found the ones they were looking for. Among the notable names who tried out were folk singer Stephen Stills, Danny Hutton, just before he joined the enormously successful Three Dog Night, and Paul Williams, who'd go on to appear in movies like Smokey and the Bandit and write award-winning songs like the Muppet movies The Rainbow Connection. And contrary to a famous urban legend, there's one notorious individual who did not almost make it into the Monkees. Convicted mass murderer Charles Manson was in prison on a probation violation when auditions took place in 1965. Monkee Micky Dolenz takes credit for starting the rumor, once telling Gilbert Gottfried, "I just made a joke. Everybody auditioned for the Monkees. Stephen Stills, Paul Williams, and Charlie Manson, and everybody took it as gospel." Monkee masters Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider found 3 band members through that extensive audition process, but everyone knows the Monkees were a 4-piece band. What happened? The 4th slot was supposed to go to seasoned folk musician Stephen Stills, before he became the Stills in the iconic trio Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Stills turned down the chance to be a Monkee, but he was kind enough to recommend his potential replacement, Peter Thorkelson, a guy he'd played with in New York who he thought shared the look the producers were after. Thorkelson, who adopted the stage name Peter Tork, landed the part of Peter Tork while also singing and playing bass in the band. Shortly before his passing in 2019, he explained to Rolling Stone, "I was hired to be an actor of a TV show. The producers did have hopes that something musical would come out of us when they cast the 4 of us, but if we couldn't have done the music, they would have been all right with us just making the TV show." The Monkees debuted in 1966, joining an old-fashioned television universe that looked pretty much the same as it had a decade before. Among the hits of the day were westerns like Bonanza and Daniel Boone, cornball variety shows like The Red Skelton Show and The Lawrence Welk Show, and sitcoms targeting an older, rural crowd, including The Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres. And then along came the Monkees, and it was wildly creative and low-key revolutionary. As opposed to the stodgier competition, the Monkees popped with vivid color and starred 4 young men with long hair who wore hippie-type clothes and slacked about in their crash pad playing rock and roll music. Still a frightening and strange concept to the greatest generation. It represented the growing influence of the counterculture. Moreover, the show chugged along at a frenetic pace, using quick cuts, asides, actors breaking character, camera tricks, and standalone proto-music videos at the end of each episode to make a series that fully embraced and expressed its rock and roll sensibility. The Monkees may have gotten some grief over the years for not being in charge of their own music, but it wasn't their fault. That's how the producers wanted it, and it caused serious behind-the-scenes tension over the years. Not only that, but showrunners also prevented them from having a say in the television series they starred in. When each individual Monkee wasn't needed on set, they were told to report to a black-walled room. There, they could do whatever they want as long as they headed back to the soundstage when their assigned call lights started blinking. The Monkees put those experiences into art. In 1968, they were largely left to their own devices to make an experimental movie called Head. It was full of surrealism, symbolism, and general wackiness, and it was written with the help of the most unlikely screenwriter.
Here's Johnny!
Yes, that Jack Nicholson. The movie resulting from the partnership includes so many bizarre sequences that fans weren't really sure what was going on, and some took it as a shockingly pro-Vietnam stance. But according to what Dolenz told Mojo, it wasn't about that at all. It was a metaphor for the Monkees. We used to talk about being in a black box all the time, when we were on tour especially, but even being on the TV set. We couldn't leave a room or hotel. The Monkees may have been designed as a corporate endeavor, but producers left writers with anti-war, hippie-leaning sentiments in charge of the Monkee House. Writers of both the Monkees and the band's songs expressed an anti-Vietnam War sentiment quite a few times, which is remarkable considering the aggressive censorship of network television in the late 1960s. CBS fired the hosts of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour for too much anti-war content, yet the Monkees got away with it. How? Some smoke and mirrors. According to a show writer who spoke to academic Dr. Roseanne Welch, the network executives didn't understand what we were saying, so we got away with a lot. Take the episode Monkey Mother, which features the band playing with dominoes. Davy asks Peter what he calls the game, and his response, Southeast Asia, is a cleverly wry send-up of the domino theory, the Cold War principle that if communism were to take hold in one country in the region, the rest would fall like dominoes. And then there's Last Train to Clarksville, the Monkees hit frequently replayed on the series. It's subtly about a young man drafted into the army and he doesn't want to go. In fact, he wonders if he's ever coming home. Monkee songwriter Bobby Hart eventually said of the song, and others, "We couldn't be too direct. We couldn't really make a protest song out of it. We kind of snuck it in." The Monkees made a lot of catchy, fun songs that millions of people enjoyed. Their style, straightforward, jangly pop rock with the flavor of British bands like the Beatles and Herman's Hermits, exhibited on Valerie, A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You, Daydream Believer, and the theme song from the Monkees, which has to be the biggest banger of a sitcom opener ever. For all their charm, the Monkees aren't regarded as a particularly innovative band.
Boy, it's not fair. We're as bad as any other group in town.
Right, yeah, but all those other groups got invitations to that audition.
Yeah, except us.
Or were they? In 1967, when the band's handlers finally allowed the members to write their own stuff, the Monkees released Headquarters, which includes a cut called Zilch. A studio experiment, it involves each Monkee saying nonsensical phrases that were repeated and layered. Peter Tork's line, Mr. Dobalina, Mr. Bob Dobalina, was actually picked out of the real world when he heard it being repeated at an airport. Non-singing vocals to a rhythmic effect, Zilch is basically a prehistoric rap song. Even the hip-hop luminary Del the Funky Homo Sapien thought so, sampling Tork's line for his 1991 hit, Mr. Dobalina. By early 1969, the Monkees began to unravel. Peter Tork left the band, spending $400,000 to buy out the last 4 years of his contract. Michael Nesmith departed in April 1970, and later that year, Jones and Dolenz recorded the Monkees' final tracks, for a while at least. Each Monkee then pursued their own path. Some were more successful than others. Nesmith became the only Monkee with the solo hit after his country rock group First National Band scored a number 21 hit with the single Joanne. He was also an early adopter of music videos, making them for his own projects and creating the compilation show Pop Clips, which aired on Nickelodeon in 1980. Parent company Warner Cable thought a 24-hour cable channel that aired just videos might be a good idea and created MTV, which they asked Nesmith to help develop. Teen Idol-looking Davy Jones took the predictable Teen Idol route. Rainy Jane hit the lower reaches of the Billboard Hot 100 in 1971, but most famously he was immortalized on an episode of The Brady Bunch in which he sings Girl and meets Marcia Brady, president of the Davy Jones fan club. He died in 2012 after suffering a massive heart attack. As for Micky Dolenz, the child star of TV's Circus Boy got back into acting and has done a ton of voiceover work for cartoons like Batman the Animated Series, The Tick, and The Scooby-Doo Show. He was a close second choice to play Fonzie on Happy Days, but was ultimately deemed too tall for the role. In 1985, concert promoter David Fishoff approached Peter Tork about reuniting the Monkees for a 20th anniversary tour. Together, Fishoff and Tork worked over the rest of the band to join up. It took a few attempts to convince Davy Jones and Micky Dolenz, while Michael Nesmith was even harder to convince. He was busy producing movies and TV shows with his company, Pacific Arts Corporation, and agreed to join when he thought the tour would consist of 10 to 20 dates. He later went public with his regrets, backing out when those 20 dates became 200. What exploded the tour from a modest nostalgic affair into one of the most massive musical undertakings of the mid-80s? MTV. In early 1986, the network aired every episode of the Monkees in the form of a weekend marathon. MTV executive Tom Freston told Rolling Stone, "We've never received such a volume of mail. We were dumbfounded by the whole thing." Suddenly, the 20-year-old show was the biggest thing among kids who weren't alive when it first aired. Almost every date on the Monkees reunion tour sold out, and the newly recorded single, That Was Then, This Is Now, hit the top 20. In 1986, the Monkees and MTV enjoyed a mutually agreeable relationship. Reruns brought huge ratings to the channel, and the exposure from MTV made the Monkees reunion tour the can't-miss event of the year. Scarcely a year later, things fell apart. After the success of That Was Then, This Is Now, the Monkees reconvened without Michael Nesmith. The product was the new album, Cool It, with the single Heart and Soul. But fans had a hard time finding the video, as MTV refused to air it. According to Monkey Business Fanzine, the Monkees were slated to appear on an MTV Super Bowl special in January 1987, but there was a miscommunication. The band had no intention of playing the show because they had been booked for another engagement. The executive in charge of the show had only been with the network for a couple of months and didn't understand the unique and fun symbiosis between band and network, so he unceremoniously retaliated by banning Heart and Soul. It's no coincidence that with the utter lack of promotion from the Monkees' previous champion, Heart and Soul faltered at number 87 on the singles chart, and sadly, Cool It stalled at number 72 on the album chart. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.